Hey guys, this is Sarah from the Intensive Cake Unit Kitchen. I'm finally posting a tutorial on getting frosting smooth on a cake. It's only taken me 5 years to make this video. When I was learning to decorate cakes, it used to take me literal hours to get frosting even semi-smooth on my cakes, and I would often get super frustrated in the process. But that was before I had the right cake tools and enough knowledge to see what I could have been doing better. So I'm making this video to hopefully make that process easier for you. Am I a little underqualified to make this video? Probably. But the tip that was the most helpful for me, I didn't actually find in the first few videos that I watched online. It won't be for everyone. I'll get into that a little bit later, but I posted in hopes that it will help someone struggling like I was. So quick overview of what I'm going to cover. I'll put the start times of these different sections in the description box below. I know all of us are busy. That way you can skip over anything that you don't need to watch. First, I'll cover the equipment you need and kind of the 5 basic steps of frosting. First, leveling your cake layers. 2, stacking your cake. 3, getting a crumb coat on. 4, getting that final layer of frosting on, and then 5, getting that layer of frosting smooth. Now 5 is where most of us struggle, but 1 through 4 can kind of make or break that process too. And I have a few tips at each step to help the whole thing go more smoothly. So then at the end of the video, I'll get into some troubleshooting. So I'll cover the things that have tripped me up as I've put cakes together and how to prevent them or to fix them if they've already gone wrong for you. And that's how you landed on this video. So let's get into it. Okay, step 1, leveling your cake layers. Honestly, one of the best tips for smooth frosting is level cake layers. It is hard to smooth frosting over a cake that's not holding still because it's uneven, and you can trust me on this, I'm the idiot that tried, it went poorly. So, once your cake layers are cool, trim down the tops until they're flat, then they'll stack evenly without tipping or trapping any air bubbles. You can do this with a serrated knife. I'll be honest and say I'm bad at holding knives completely flat, so I like my cake leveler, and that is what you see me using here. Okay, on to number 2, stacking your cake layers. If you've ever built a block tower, it's really not more complicated than that, other than the fact that you need the whole thing to hold still for frosting when you're finished. So I start with a little bit of frosting on my cake board so that base layer will hold still. Then as I add sequential cake layers to the cake, I like to either hold my bench scraper up to them or give the turntable a quick spin, watching the cake edges to make sure that I have the layers centered and even. The biggest thing that could potentially mess you up at this step is your cake filling. If you're new to cakes, probably your easiest option is to fill with frosting. But if you want to fill your cake with something other than frosting, say ganache or jam, you're going to want to pipe a ring or like a dam of frosting around the outer edge of your cake layer and put that filling in the center. Also bear in mind the filling needs to have either a thick enough consistency or be in a thin enough layer to handle the weight of the cake layers that are going to be going on top of it without compressing and squishing down, because that could potentially make the sides of your cake bulge out as you frost them. Okay, number 3, the crumb coat. So next, you want to spread a crumb coat on the outside of your cake. This is a thin layer of frosting over your cake that will keep the crumbs out of your outside layer. Cakes often have some crumbs on their edges that come off into the frosting when you start to spread it on the cake, and that will really mess up the outside of your cake. Also, crumb coating is essentially kind of a practice round. The spreading and the smoothing motions that you use are the same as when you're going to smooth the frosting on the outside of your cake. The good news is this round doesn't need to be perfect. If it looks full of crumbs, that's literally the whole point. It also doesn't have to be completely smooth, although the smoother it is, the easier smoothing your next layer of frosting will be. So to apply a crumb coat, first spread a thin layer of frosting over your cake. I like to use an offset spatula for this. I'm using a small one here because of an old wrist injury. It goes faster with a large one. Then once your cake is covered, smooth the frosting with a cake scraper or a pastry cutter. So to do this, you want to set the bottom of your cake scraper down flat on your cake board or turntable and hold it at an angle really close to your cake. Then, holding light pressure against the side of the cake, rotate the turntable to smooth your frosting. And you want to clean your cake scraper off after every pass or 2. After those first few passes, you're probably going to start to notice little low spots, kind of some holes in your frosting. Grab your offset spatula, fill those in with some more frosting, Then with your cake scraper, scrape them smooth. Now, as you smooth your frosting, you'll probably notice a little lip or a rough rim of frosting developing at the top edge of your cake. And that's a good thing. If you don't see one, add a little bit more frosting to that top edge and smooth it again. Once your sides are smooth, use your spatula or your scraper to pull that top edge in toward the center of your cake. Hold it as flat and level as you can. As you pull in, you'll start to create that sharp top edge that you're going for. So this is a tip that really helped me out. It may not work for everyone, but I either freeze my cake layers beforehand, or at this point, I put my cake into the freezer for at least 30 minutes, often longer. And here's why. A cold cake will firm up the outside frosting layer as you put it on and make it much harder to accidentally scrape back down to your crumb coat as you smooth your frosting. I used to accidentally do this all the time. It drove me nuts. May not work for everyone, but it was a huge help to me. At a minimum, once your crumb coat's on, chill the cake for 10 to 15 minutes in the fridge until it's firm to the touch and not sticky. The crumbs are now trapped in that first layer, and you can frost without them getting in your way. Speak of the devil. Now for that final frosting layer. Start by spreading a layer of frosting over the top of the cake and a bit over the top edge. This sets you up to get your cake top and that outer edge smooth. Next, spread a layer of frosting onto your cake sides. You want this layer thicker than your crumb coat. I usually shoot for about 1/4 inch or so. If you prefer, you can use a piping bag to put this layer on. I don't find piping worth the time that it takes, but it's up to you. Otherwise, spread this layer on as evenly as you can. Again, I'm using a small spatula because my wrist doesn't like the big one, but a big one will go faster. Okay, now your final layer of frosting is on, and if you're like me, it's nothing close to smooth. But that's okay. Now for the cake scraper. You want to set it down with the base flat on your cake board or turntable. This will help you to keep it straight up and down. Hold the scraper with an edge touching the frosting at an angle close to the cake and rotate the turntable, holding the scraper as still as you can. Clean the extra frosting off of your cake scraper every pass or so. I usually use the side of the mixing bowl for this. And repeat. Continue to work your way around the cake, smoothing as you go. After your first couple of passes, you'll probably notice some holes and gaps in your frosting. With some frosting on your offset spatula, fill those holes in, it doesn't have to be pretty, and repeat the smoothing process with your cake scraper. Alright, so full disclosure, this is where I used to have a lot of trouble. Maybe I'm just an overzealous cake scraper, but I used to have so much trouble with accidentally scraping most of my frosting back off. I'd get down to the crumb coat and have to basically start over. This is where a really cold cake was helpful to me and why I often freeze my cake layers or put my crumb-coated cake in the freezer for a while before I start frosting. One caveat here, if you live in an area where it's really warm or really humid, that tip may not work well for you. I haven't really lived in super hot or always humid areas, so I haven't had a huge issue with my cake sweating or developing condensation on the sides because of the temperature change. So if you live in a humid area and you still want to try this, you might have to deal with a little bit of condensation on the outside of the cake or plan to crank up your AC a bit or run a fan. Just an FYI. So as you work your way around the cake, you're probably starting to notice a little bit of a frosting, crown, lip, kind of a rough looking edge poking up a bit past the top of the cake. And this is a good thing. This is what you're going to use to create a clean, sharp edge at the top of the cake. Now, if you haven't seen that lip start to form, you probably don't have quite enough frosting at the top of the cake. So add a little bit more frosting to that top edge and make another few passes with your cake scraper. So once you're happy with the sides of the cake, you're ready to shape that top edge. So gently use your offset spatula or a scraper to pull a small section of frosting in toward the center of the cake at a time. Clean off your spatula or scraper when the frosting starts to build up. I tried to demonstrate this with a spatula because that's what most people use, but to be honest, I have the easiest time shaping that top edge with my bench scraper. I can line the bench scraper up with the top of the cake and make sure that I'm keeping it straight and not taking off too much frosting. Now, if this doesn't go perfectly for you on the first pass, that's okay. Honestly, I was in a hurry filming this one because I could hear my baby waking up from his nap, so I didn't actually do a great job the first time with this cake. You can always make another few passes around the top of the cake with your scraper to straighten things up and recreate a bit of that lip, and then pull that top edge in again. So if round 1 doesn't go exactly to plan, don't worry, you can always try again. Okay, so that covers the process. All of that said, if your first few tries at frosting a cake don't go the way you want, that is normal. If it feels like it is taking a million years to smooth your frosting, that's also normal. If you get frustrated in the process and you want to throw your cake out the window, again, that is still normal. None of these techniques are exactly complicated, but they're not really intuitive either, and every new skill takes practice. I've been frosting cakes for years, and obviously it doesn't always go perfectly for me. Despite what Instagram would have you believe, getting smooth frosting on cakes doesn't happen instantly for anyone. But the more you practice, the better you'll get and the faster you'll get. So that said, on to some troubleshooting. Sometimes you've checked all the boxes, you've done all the things, you've followed all the steps, and you're still glaring at a bumpy, wonky looking cake on that turntable. Now what? So this is where I'll do my best to help you with troubleshooting. Okay, first up, why are my cake sides bulging? There are actually a few possible reasons for this. The first two are related. If you're filling with buttercream, it's possible your frosting isn't quite thick enough. If you're using something else, it's possible that your cake filling is too soft or that filling layer is a little bit too thick. And as you add the next cake layers on, it's starting to squish out the sides of the cake, causing a bulge. Third possibility is that your cake layers are a touch uneven, and as they're settling, trapped air pockets are causing bulges in the frosting. I think 1 or 2 are probably the most common, but 3 is definitely a possible culprit as well. So making sure that your buttercream is a good medium consistency, your cake fillings aren't too soft or layered on too thickly, and leveling your cake layers before you get going, and pressing each one down a bit as you add each layer will help the cake settle without bulging between layers. Having said all that, I recognize it's of limited help if you have a cake in front of you right now with bulged out sides. So if you need it fixed right now, disassembling the cake, putting it back together is an option, albeit time-consuming and a bit of a nuisance. You could also try putting the cake in the freezer for 20 minutes or so. This will help set the frosting, hopefully a bit of the filling more firmly, then spread another layer over the top and try smoothing again. This is a little bit of a Hail Mary fix, and those bulges may come back when the cake comes back to room temperature, but if you don't have time for a complete disassembly and reassembly, it's something to try. Okay, next, why are my cake layers sliding around while I'm trying to frost this cake? Again, there are a few possible reasons. The most likely, again, is maybe your frosting isn't quite thick enough. If you thicken your frosting with some powdered sugar, I usually add about a quarter cup at a time and beat it in. Or use a firm, stable recipe like American buttercream or cream cheese buttercream, and that should help you. Another possibility is your cake filling might be too wet or slippery. Sometimes this happens to me when I fill cakes with jam or with macerated fruit. So piping a thicker dam or rim of frosting around the outside of the cake layer should help. Another quick fix involves the cake in the freezer for about 30 minutes, tip that I mentioned above. You may get a bit of condensation or sweating if you're in a humid area, but a more stable cake will probably be worth it. All right, these two I grouped because they're a little bit related. Why are my cake layers crumbling when I frost them? Also, why is the frosting sticking or pulling when I'm smoothing it? I grouped these because the answer is generally the same. Very possibly your frosting is a little bit too thick. Now, some cake layers are more prone to crumbling than others. This is just a function of the recipe components and how cohesive or dense the cake structure is. But try thinning down your frosting with just a couple tablespoons of some milk or some heavy whipping cream. Or try chilling your cake layers for about 20 minutes before continuing. Chilled or semi-frozen cake layers always handle more easily and they crumble less. And thinner frosting will have much less of a tendency to stick or pull apart your cake layers as you go about frosting. Okay, last but not least, you've done all the things, you've tried all the tips, it's not working, you're frustrated. My best advice in this situation, take 10. Just walk away. There it is. If that stupid cake just isn't smoothing the way that you want it to, stuff it in the fridge. Take 10 minutes, 15, 20, go do something else. That cake will be fine in the fridge. You'll get some time to clear your head. You can come back to it with a cleaner slate. When you come back, spread a thin layer of frosting over the cake. Try it again. This is embarrassing to admit, but I 100% did this with the cake that I made to tape and photograph for this post. Things always go better for me after I just take a break. And that covers everything that I have to tell you, at least for now. Please leave a comment on this video or send me an email if you have any questions or issues as you frost your cakes. I'm always happy to help however I can. I am 100% here to help you troubleshoot, especially if you're having a recurrent problem. Have fun, stick with it, keep practicing. You've got this. Happy decorating.